Bitcoin has had some crazy price movement over the last few months, but it looks like it's back up to pretty much all-time highs. And are we wondering, is it going up? Is it going down? Is it going to crash anytime soon? Well, let's take a look at the price chart, some social trends, and the kind of grander Bitcoin bull market cycle to see what's going on. I'm Brett at CryptoGX, and in this video, we're going to look over a few different things when it comes to Bitcoin. And we're really going to be taking a look right here, as you can see at the Bitcoin price chart. We're going to look a little bit about how the movement has been going, go over what we have seen over the past few months. Then we're going to look into the Bitcoin cycle, basically the halving, and how this typically works when it comes to the price metrics over time. I'll show you a rainbow chart, which you can see right here. This rainbow chart shows a little bit of the basically logarithmic regression of where Bitcoin typically moves within these cycles. Then we'll look at some social metrics on the block.co. These play a huge role in Bitcoin's price movement over time, so we'll definitely take a deep dive into that. And then lastly, we're going to look at some trading view indicators to see what really happens in a long-term scale for Bitcoin. So let's go back to the beginning. We're going to start off right here on the trading view chart that we've just been seeing over the last, let's say, 7 or 8 months before this huge Bitcoin price hike back in November of 2024. Obviously, this was the kind of start of the huge price movement. If we go back a little bit, Bitcoin was moving pretty much sideways from March of 2024 to November of 2024. Now, at this particular time, there was lots of things going on globally. One of the main indicators that really started this pop off here was the US election. Obviously, there was lots of news here. Basically, we were finding out that the new administration was coming in, and there was lots of hype around that and the things that they were planning on doing for cryptocurrency at that time. That caused a huge jump. And when you look back at other cycles in that particular timeline, November after a halving, that jump is very typical. So if we look back to 2020, now here is the previous election, and you can see November of 2020, it was a little bit more of a steady increase, but at that time it was increasing. And then even beyond that into December, another continual increase. This is very normal when it comes to Bitcoin's price movement. And if you zoom in, it doesn't look quite as small of an increase. November here, going from 13,000 to about, let's say, 20,000. That's a huge increase. That's about 50%. You just kind of zoom in on the area that you're looking at. So election cycles obviously are a huge factor when it comes to Bitcoin's price, and that started us off. But where are we at now? So let's zoom back to our current timeline. Now we have this huge increase, and then we had a little bit of consolidation back and forth here, and then it really dropped off when the kind of tariffs were getting all talked about. And obviously that had a huge effect from somewhere around late January to about April. Things kind of went sideways when the tariffs were kind of going in and out and deciding whether or not they were going to actually have an effect on the economy. And then there was a recovery here, and now we're moving a little bit sideways again. Now, at this time, we're obviously at all-time highs again. We peaked here, and then we're peaking here again. And this is on the daily chart. If we go to the weekly chart, and then we zoom in a little bit again, you can see that our weekly painted chart is the highest that Bitcoin has ever seen. So we're at another peak for Bitcoin. What does that mean? So we're going to want to look at the entire halving cycle and how this applies to where we're at. From here, July to November, obviously that's been 9-10 months, something like that. So that's a really long time, and we're probably pretty curious, okay, when is this cycle supposed to end? We're seeing another peak. Is it time to get out? Well, let's take a look. So here is our halving cycle chart, and you can see the historical data all the way back to the beginning of Bitcoin. And you can see the timing of the basically bull run start to bull run end, as well as when the halvings were. So starting off at the halving to the next peak, where the consolidation went, where what I would call the kind of buying time is, and then where the next halving is again. And so if we're zooming up to where we are now, roughly, let's say 18 monthly candles have been painted in this chart. And last cycle, from the halving to the peak, or at least the end peak before the drop, it was 18 candles. Before that, it was 17 candles. Before that, it was 12 candles. So based on this and all the other regressions that we see, the candles are typically getting a little bit longer, or basically they're going to be more time between the beginning and the end of the cycle. So that's why the estimate here, at least with this particular indicator, is about 21 bars. So we're at 18, which means, in my opinion, somewhere between now and the next 3 to 4 months is when we're probably going to see our ultimate peak, or at least where our drop off is going to be. As you can see from our previous cycle, there was a double peak before our drop off, but that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for when we're supposed to be getting out. And that's a pretty good indicator here. We've got somewhere between between maybe, let's say, 2 to 3 monthly candles, really. So now we know what the timeline is for what we're looking for. Let's kind of take a look at the actual price that we're looking for, or some actual potential price targets that we could be looking for. In order to do that, we're going to look at the rainbow chart right here. And so this is a logarithmic regression of the price points of where Bitcoin has historically gone. And they're basically separated into these different colors based on a way to indicate when to buy and when to sell. So we've got a few different cycle peaks in here. These right here are actually not in the red zone. Don't worry about that now. We'll get back to it. But this is the peak. This is our last cycle peak, the previous cycle peak, the one before that, and one before that. Now, as you can see from this linear regression chart, the previous peaks have exceeded this red maximum bubble territory zone. And our most recent peak didn't even touch the red zone. The peak before that was perfectly in the red zone. So essentially, this logarithmic regression could be even better tuned based on the past historical cycles, but it is a general guideline. So if we zoom in here, we've got the last cycle topping out in the orange zone, and now we're still in this green accumulate zone. We're not even in the still cheap or hold or is this a bubble zone yet. And again, this is just an estimate, but it's still a good way to look at where we potentially are. The peak here, 2017, was touching the top of the red. And now with that in mind, you can see, obviously we are here in July. If we go out to our basically 2 to 3 month mark, as far as we can, that would be September, October, November. Let's say end of November here. The peak of this red category would be damn near $1 million. Now, that is an insane price target, especially based on this current movement. So do we actually expect that? No. And that is also kind of on the longer end of the term here. If we went a little bit closer, August, 875, 900. But these are crazy limits. The last peak was in the orange zone where it was about 70,000. And then our peak here was in this kind of yellow zone. Is this a bubble? Perfectly right about 70,000. So if we assume that we're going to be in that same zone or lower, that's probably a way better way to assume based on it logarithmically being lower. So if that was the case, the high point would be 377,000 in this a bubble zone. Now, personally, because of the way this chart works and the kind of logarithmic functions, and it's basically off, it's that it looks like we're going lower and lower and lower of these zones as the cycles progress, meaning that the potential upside for Bitcoin is going to be lower every single time. So if the peak in that previous one was in the is this a bubble zone, we're not going to hit that, in my opinion. Since it went down about, let's say, 1, 2, 3 zones from the previous peak, the zone that we could be looking for is either the hold zone, the still cheap zone, or the accumulate zone. So I would say on the low end, we're probably looking at about 150,000 for the Bitcoin top. And then the high end, 274,000 seems real like a stretch for me personally. Maybe 250 would be possible. But this obviously is a huge range, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of geopolitical things going on. So I would keep an eye on at least 150 and be okay with that personally over the next 3 months. But that's the zone that we're looking for with this rainbow chart. Now, obviously, we don't want to just look at the price to find out when to end, but we want to look at other indicators of basically trends and what people are actually thinking to find out what is going on. So if you look at the block.co and look at their social media data, we've got a few different alternatives: web traffic, app usage, and social. We're going to start off with web traffic. So web traffic, you can see things like Google search volumes for Bitcoin and Coinbase, and you'll be able to tell where these things actually follow the trend of Bitcoin's price. So you can see right here, the Google search volume of Bitcoin actually typically does a pretty good job of correlating with the price of Bitcoin. Low volume here, and then November, boom, big search volume. And as we saw right here, boom, November, it had our huge peak. Now, it's not a perfect correlation because as you can see, there was a dip from January to March, and then, after that, April, June, a big peak, and the dip happened, but, we don't really see the increase. Now, all this is a little bit behind. It's updated April 15 of 2025, so our most up-to-date data isn't there, unfortunately. We can't see the current search volume, but then if you look at, other things like these mentions in SEC filings, that's another one. Somewhat of a peak here. Again, these are not the perfect correlation. So take that into consideration when we're looking at the other particular metrics here. We're going to skip app usage and go to social. And when you're on the social page, I'm going to scroll down to tweet volume. This is the one I like to look at right here. And you can see it's updated as of July 6, 2025. These peaks to me are pretty darn close to correlate it, especially for Bitcoin and its price. So as you can see here, there was a huge spike in mid-November when we had that spike in the Bitcoin price. There was a little bit of a lull and then a spike again. And as you can see, there was a little bit of a lull and then a spike again in kind of towards the end of December. And that's pretty darn indicative of the actual price. You can see that it flowed down as the price did towards March and April. And then there's kind of been some peaks that have, jumped up, and the general trend is upwards as well. This peak in May and then throughout June. And as you can see here, obviously there's been, more spikes here in the May and then down and then up in June again. So tweet volume is a really good one just to see the general trend of where Bitcoin's going. Overall, I would say this is looking upwards. Now we're going to go back to our alternative metrics and look at app usage, because this is a really important one. Over the past few cycles, when Coinbase, the app, comes into the top 10 of the App Store, it's been correlated every single time that it basically indicates that the top is coming. Every time that Coinbase has gotten into the top 10, it's been a matter of weeks or maybe even days where Coinbase comes into the top 10 and then the price crashes after that. So if we're looking to find that, we'll go down here and we'll search for crypto apps ranking in the App Store in the US. And so we see Coinbase is this orange line right here. And if we can get onto Coinbase, there we go. They are ranked 298 right now in the entire App Store. And then if we're just looking in the finance category, we can see that Coinbase is not particularly in here. If you want to look at crypto.com, that's a big one. It's kind of on a downtrend right now. It's 59th. Back in November, boom, it was up to #1 app in the finance category. And then in January, we had that other peak in Bitcoin price. It was up to about 3rd in the finance category. So these are pretty indicative of the Bitcoin price as well. So when you see that peak, let's go back to this section. Just click on Coinbase. You can see the trend following as well. Boom. Coinbase was number 9th in November. That was a huge indicator of the Bitcoin price increasing. This was increased actually from 317 to 117 by the 7th of November. Where was the Bitcoin price at on the 7th of November? Let's look at the daily price to see if this was a good indicator to actually follow for buying in. So if you bought in on the 7th of November, the closing day price was 75,000. Let's say you held it a week to the 14th. Closing price was 87,000. It continued up to a peak of 108,000. If you've held on and kept an eye there, that would be a good time to have bought. Finding these giant increases looks like they're going to happen before the price of Bitcoin moves, at least possibly. And you can see the trend is kind of going upwards. So keep an eye on that as well. The last thing we're going to check out here is a couple indicators on TradingView that I think are really important, other than the kind of logarithmic regression, the rainbow chart, and all those other social indicators to show where we're going. And then we're going to talk about really where I think we're going. So this first indicator is called the Bitcoin halving cycle profit. And essentially what it does over the history of Bitcoin, it'll give you the time when Bitcoin is halving. It will show you when you should start dollar cost averaging in, basically when you should start buying into Bitcoin over time, like a weekly buy-in, a bi-weekly buy-in, not just dumping all of your money in all at once, because dollar cost averaging is the most efficient and effective strategy for the large majority of investors. Basically, it said a dollar cost average 135 weeks ago. At this point, Bitcoin was $16,000. This was on December of 2020. And then you could average into November of 2023, which it was $37,000. So you're probably averaging at $20,000. Okay. The halving was then on April of 2024. And this profit start is essentially the profit of all owners of Bitcoin. This is where they're estimating the main profit period is based on the previous cycles. As you can see right here, based on the previous peak, this is the profit start. And then this is the kind of profit end. This is our most recent previous cycle. The profit start, in my opinion, is not, quite correct, but that's why the dollar cost averaging earlier matters. And then the profit end was 80 weeks ago. This typical timeline is pretty accurate when it comes to the cycles, basically estimating when the cycle is going to end. So their estimate on this chart is about mid-end October of 2025. And that doesn't mean it's going to exactly end on that date. As you can see from 2 cycles ago, the peak was about a month and a half before this end. And then you can see on the most recent cycle, the peak was like 2 weeks before that end. So it's not perfect, but it is pretty darn close. This is a better buy indicator than anything, but you can see, obviously, we're getting closer to the end here. Now, another indicator that I have down below here that's very, very important, especially if you're on on the either weekly or monthly timeline is the MACD cross. And you're going to want to have this one because of the fact that when it crosses, interesting things happen. And basically it happens tried and true pretty much every time. So as you can see, that you have these blue and orange lines here. And what you want to watch for is when they cross. So if we're looking at our previous cycle here, going for the halving in this DCA area, I'm going to increase this even further so you can see what's going on. Basically, when this blue line crosses above the orange line, that means that we're most likely in a green scenario. The volume's going up towards buys and the price is cycling up. And then as you see right here, this peak crashed, boom, the blue line crashed below the orange line here, and we crashed a bit, crossed up again, boom, some more profit, crashed down once it crossed below that again. So what we're looking for is that same sort of thing. And as we can see, if we go back to November of 2024, that cross happened in the 14th of October. And then November, we saw that huge pump during the kind of election rumors time and, you know, the whole election cycle and all that good stuff. So we had that huge pump. And then in January, we saw it cross down below and it went down for, let's say, 2-3 months into about from February to April. And then we're crossing back up again. We've seen that as we've obviously recovered the $100,000 line. We're into near all-time high area and we're pushing that. And you can see there's a little bit of halt here because of the fact that we were at about 110,000 before. That was a line of resistance and Bitcoin's figuring out what it wants to do, but we are still way above this orange line here. It's figuring out if it wants to cross below and the volume is kind of trending downward. But the fact that we have so much of the cycle left is why I'm super bullish still. I'm still pushing for Bitcoin to break past this $110,000 range, especially based on the fact that, you know, our MACD is still crossed above. We still have lots of volume to go when it comes to search trends history, Coinbase getting back into the top 10 of apps, as well as, you know, the logarithmic cycle on the rainbow chart, basically showing that we have lots of room to go up. And then all these other Bitcoin halving cycle markers showing that we have lots of time left based on the historical trends of every single cycle. So I'm super bullish. I appreciate you taking a look at this and I want to know what you guys think. So drop a comment below and let me know where you think Bitcoin's going next. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for all things crypto. I'll leave links to Coinbase and crypto.com in the description. If you want $50 worth of crypto, sign up with those links and you'll get some, as well as a link to MoonShot. If you're interested in meme coins, use that link, sign up, and you'll get free meme coins just for signing up with those links. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.